All right. I think we're live. Okay. Okay. All right. I think we're live. There we are. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here in our session today. As always, I'm honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you in our sacred space together today. So here we are in sacred space. The things we will do together in our time here today is, number one, we will go through the process quickly of setting our sacred space. And then once we're in sacred space, we will have our talk for the session for the month. And the topic for today's session is hope, fate, and bliss. Hope, fate, and bliss. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by that today. At the end of the talk, we'll have a bit of an exercise, a prompt, a reflection for you to do between now and the next session, and then we will close our sacred space. So as we set our sacred space here together, I guess the first thing I would like to say is that our intention here is that we would like together to make a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, which is the definition of sacred space for us. In order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we define that. It could be a muse that guides us, a higher power, intuition, brilliant flashes of insight that come to us from wherever it comes to us from, right? Some of us don't really want to know where it comes from, but we like to prepare ourselves to receive it anyway. So a safe sanctuary space for us all to relax and surrender with no feeling of danger or threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do every time, that we all follow the 4 principles of proceeding in sacred space. The first is confidentiality, standard Vegas rules. What happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now, that's the rule that we follow when we meet in person around the world, when we are traveling. But here online, the stream is public, the replay will be public. So the way we manage confidentiality online is via anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous. But if you would like to be anonymous, you would come into the crowdcast stream. You would go into the edit profile feature of the platform, and then just change your username to Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, what have you, and then come back and continue participating in the event. The second principle is that we try as much as possible to refrain from doing anything that will give any feeling of threat or controlling or instilling fear in each other. Obviously, refrain from anything with malicious intent, but even well-meaning intent, right? So there is also no fixing, no intervening, no tough love, none of this sort of this will hurt me more than it hurts you, right? And the reason for that is that we are holding space for each other to be however we are. Right now, there's nothing wrong with trying to help your fellow human and try to get them to a better place. But because the nature of trying to help someone through the intention of or feeling of fixing or even tough love is of the nature of threat and control, right? You better take this medicine or else you'll miss out on something. We simply don't want to do that here, not because it's wrong, but because that is not the nature of the space we're trying to create here. It's like when you go to the bank to take care of some business at the bank, right? There are certain rules. You can't act in certain ways in the bank. It's not to say that singing and dancing is wrong, but you don't do that at the bank because you're trying to get other things done that you can only get done at the bank, right? And there are certain things about sacred space where there are certain things you can only get done in sacred space, certain nourishments you can receive only when you're in sacred space. So that's why we try to refrain from that. We are holding space for each other to be however we are: anxious, afraid, happy, relaxed, angry. And however you are, we are okay with that. And we simply hold space for you. The third principle of sacred space is that there is no commerce, right? So because we are in this sacred space, where we're trying to maintain a space that is devoid of fear, threat, and control, nothing may be marketed, right? Nothing may be sold or recommended or suggested. I've talked about this in detail in other talks, but the act of marketing, where I say, do you have this problem? And you're like, well, yes, I guess I do have this problem. Isn't this a horrible problem? Let me give you the solution, right? That is all the best marketing is in the profane with fear, threat, and control, right? You have a problem and buy this product, or else you will not get the pain relief, or else you will not get the solution to your problem. And again, there's nothing wrong with that intrinsically. But in sacred space, where we're trying to relieve ourselves of the feeling of fear, threat, and control, we don't do that, right? So nothing may be sold or marketed. I can't sell you anything. Gowrie, my editor, when she comes on screen to tell the story for the session, cannot sell you anything. Please refrain from marketing to each other in the chat. But this also covers recommendations or suggestions, right? So even if I recommend a book, that might be good for whatever problem you bring up, okay? And I don't even know the author. I'm getting no commission. There's no benefit to me from recommending this third-party resource. We even try to refrain from that because it doesn't matter whether I get any benefit. The thing we're trying to avoid is this feeling of threat, where you need to do X, Y, Z, or else A, B, C, right? It's that threat and conditionality that we're trying to avoid. Said another way, we are here for your energy, for your essence, and to be in each other's presence, not for the things you bring, not for the value add you bring. Right? We are here for you, not for what you do or provide in sacred space. And the fourth and final principle of sacred space is that there is no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything, to chat, to not chat, to ask questions, not ask questions. We'll suggest an exercise at the end, but there's no quiz. You can do it or take it or leave it, whatever you like. Again, the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And all of us together here in a group will tend to amplify that effect. Okay. So this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. There is no fear, threat, or control to whip you to come to sacred space, stay in sacred space, and come and go as you please, as you feel so moved, right? Without any feeling of fear, threat, or control. But we are about to cross the threshold in sacred space. So if you're not okay with that, we will just give you a moment and pause here to give you a moment to withdraw from the group as you feel so moved. And then that's totally okay. We'll still catch up with you later in profane space. We'll still be friends. If you're on my email list, I will still send you emails. So no worries at all. No worries at all. Okay. So now we will pause for a moment to let everyone make their selection. Okay. Okay. And so for the rest of us here, we will now move forward together into our shared sacred space for the month. And as we cross the threshold into our shared sacred space, I will just remind everyone, myself included, that we are now in a space where we would like to try as much as possible to observe the four principles of proceeding in sacred space: confidentiality / anonymity, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right, welcome to our shared sacred space for the month of October 2021. So now we'll move on to our talk that we'll have today. And the topic for today we've selected will be the topic of hope, fate, and bliss. So this month's mythical brainstorm that I had with my editor, Gowrie, with the story she selected, brought us to a reflection on the nature of fate and its relationship to our bliss. And in all of that, what is the role of hope? And especially now for us in this time period, as we continue to emerge out of the pandemic step by step, when we look back on our experience of what we've just went through, like how do we see our experience? How do we frame our experience in our own minds, right? In the narrative of our lives as we move forward. Do we see everything as fate, as punishment, as we said in the very first session of this series back in March 2020? Or do we see it as a kind of transformation, which all transformations, all birthings are painful and not risk-free? But do we actually see it as a kind of transformation, potentially toward our bliss? So to help us with that reflection, we will read today the Greek myth of Pandora, and then let the golden thread kind of lead us from there. So Gary, if you're there and your signal is okay, please come on up.
Hi, Artie.
Hi, Gary. How are you?
Hi. Hi. You see me and
Thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's fun to be back.
All right.
Yeah.
So would you tell us about the story you've selected for the session?
Yeah, so you know, we really just need an excuse to go back to Greek mythology, I think. So this was the time I was looking for stories, and then you had this email by one of our participants who said, but what about, the Pandora myth? Like, what does it say? And I love the idea because it's one of those stories which is just so popular, like, even if people aren't too familiar with Greek mythology, pretty much everyone knows the Pandora story.
Right.
And it's also one of those stories which gets told in the allegorical way so much.
Like, you better do this or else.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, oh, don't open the box of troubles and miseries, and curiosity killed the cat, and all of those kinds of things.
Right.
And it was interesting to me that I've never actually thought about it from the sacred lens as to what symbolism is. So so I thought, why not? Yeah, that's what we do.
And see what happens. Yeah. I love it. Okay. Would you tell us the story?
Yeah, so it's interesting that, to tell Pandora's story, usually, in popular culture or in conversations, when we talk about the Pandora story, it's usually just starts and ends with Pandora, right? But when you go into mythology, Pandora's story is not a standalone story. It starts much, much, much earlier than that.
Yes.
And to know Pandora, we need to go back to Prometheus, like that far back.
Good.
Right. So I love that part, that it's much richer than what we know in regular conversations.
Yes. Lead us on.
Yeah. So when we're talking about Prometheus, it's really, really old times. We're going back to the times of, the Titans who ruled Olympus and the world much before the gods, the Zeus and other gods. So Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus were sons of Titans. Right, and the same Titans who fought against Zeus, and then Zeus defeated them, sent them into prison to the underworld. But even though the Titans were imprisoned, Prometheus and Epimetheus were free to roam the earth. They were free to wander around anywhere they liked. And so Prometheus, anyway, didn't want to spend too much time in Mount Olympus. So there's a bit of the story that what kept Prometheus interested was thinking and planning for the future. And in fact, Prometheus's name itself means forethought. So he was always thinking of the future, always thinking of, how do I make tomorrow better? How do I make the world prepared for what might come? How do I make everyone wiser? And so on and so forth. So he was always thinking about what's coming up. While the younger brother, Epimetheus, well, his name means afterthought. And he was always thinking about yesterday, last year, things that happened in the past. And he didn't care much about what might come to pass, right? So these two brothers were roaming around, wandering the earth. And, Prometheus had always wanted kind of to create a better world. So even before this big war between Titans and gods happened, he'd fashioned these creatures called humans by molding them out of clay. And he fashioned them after himself or his father or uncle. He'd also fashioned women out of clay, and they were made after his aunts and his mother. And he took his time. He was in no hurry. He was making replicas of himself. And meanwhile, Epimetheus was in charge of creating animals and creatures, and he was making them fast. So he had all these bunch of defense skills and qualities that he had, that he freely gave to each creature that he created. So Epimetheus gave fur to some creatures to keep themselves warm, and sharp teeth and claws and, things like that, where they could use that to defend themselves. But Prometheus was more interested in making humans like himself, like gods who roamed around Mount Olympus. So he didn't give humans any of these, defensive qualities because they didn't need them. Or that's what he thought. But to his dismay, he found out that when these humans went out into the world and started to live their lives, they were not as happy as he thought they would be. They were poor and they were pitiful and they were miserable because, they were living in caves and they were scared of coming out into the sun because they might be hunted by wild beasts. So they were dying of starvation and they were cold. So they were the most miserable of all living creatures. So then Prometheus said to himself, if only they had fire, they could warm themselves and cook their food and learn to make tools and build houses. They would be better off. So without fire, they're worse off than beasts. So he approached Zeus and he begged Zeus to give fire to men. He made an appeal to him. And Zeus said, I will not give them a spark. If humans had fire, they would become strong and wise like us. And, where would we be? So it's all right. Let them shiver in the cold. Let them live like beasts. And that's good for us. So Prometheus, couldn't say anything to that. So he went back. But he had his heart set on giving humans fire and helping mankind. So he didn't give up. So as he was walking by the shore of the sea, he found a fennel stalk. He broke it off so that the hollow center that was dry, and he held out that stalk to the rising sun. And as soon as the stalk touched the sun, the dry core caught fire. And he quickly took it to earth. And then, he made a fire out of, dry wood. And he called all these shivering humans from their caves, built a fire for them, showed them how to warm themselves. And then every home, every cave, every settlement had this, cheerful fire blaze going on. men and women gathered round it. They were warm and they were happy. They were not miserable anymore. And then he taught them how to cook. He taught them how to make tools. So soon enough, the world changed. From their wild and savage habits and lurking in dark caves and dark places, humans came out into the open air and bright sunlight. And they were so glad that, this was like a second life. And so Prometheus taught them little by little. He taught them how to make houses, how to build houses of wood and stone, how to tame sheep and cattle, and and growing crops. Every single thing that that made humans civilized, as we call it today, was taught by Prometheus. So things started to look good. A golden age would appear soon, right? Had it not been for Zeus. Now Zeus found out what was going on and he was furious. He wanted to know who did all this, and soon enough he found out that it was Prometheus, and he had gone against his will and given humankind fire. And Zeus was absolutely livid. And he said, well, I will put Prometheus in prison with his parents, but I have time for that. There's no hurry. But first, I'll get to these humans. I'm going to make them 10 times more miserable than they were before this. And so he set about, and this was a very strange and roundabout way to make humans miserable. So first thing he did was he ordered Hephaestus to mold a woman out of some clay. He gave him a lump of clay and said, mold a woman out of it, and this woman had to be the most beautiful, perfect woman ever. So Hephaestus did what he was ordered, and he carried the statue of this woman to Zeus, and then Zeus gave it life. And he called all the gods and goddesses, and he said, let us all give some wonderful gift to this woman. And so one god gave her beauty, another gave her a lovely voice, another gave her good manners and a kind heart and wisdom and skill. And some goddess gave her curiosity, right? And at the end of it, they called her Pandora. And Pandora means all gifted, because she had received gifts from every god and goddess. There's even this, that Athena herself wove a beautiful dress for Pandora. And so she was this all gifted woman who was just perfect in every sense. So, and this Pandora was so beautiful and so talented that even gods loved her, right? They admired her for a while, before Zeus called Hermes the messenger. And he sent Pandora with Hermes to find Prometheus and his brother. And so Hermes met Epimetheus first, the younger brother, and he said, here's a beautiful woman, and Zeus has sent her to you as your wife. It's a gift to you. And Prometheus had warned his brother to beware of any gift that Zeus might send. But the moment Epimetheus saw Pandora, he forgot all of that advice. And, she was so beautiful, so perfect, that he took her home to live with him and be his wife. And Pandora was happy in her home. And even Prometheus, when he saw her, he was very happy that his brother had married her because she was so lovely. And when Pandora came to Epimetheus from Mount Olympus, she brought with her a jar. And in most popular stories, it's now called Pandora's box. It's considered a box, but in one of the older stories, it was a jar. And Zeus gave it to her when she left Olympus and said that it held many precious things. But Athena, being the wise goddess that she is, warned Pandora and said, never, ever open it and look inside. Right? But curiosity eventually got to Pandora, and she said, well, Zeus gave this to me himself. And he said it contains precious things. So it must be jewelry, right? It must be beautiful things that I should be using. What use is it if it's sitting in a jar and Zeus gave them to me and I never even looked at them? And so the more she thought about this jar, the more curious she got. And every day she took it from the shelf, felt the lid, and tried to kind of open it and examine it. And she would put it back. And finally one day, she felt that she could no longer, just hold back, and said, it's only Athena who told me this. I mean, why would I care anyway? Because, Zeus gave this to me, so let me take a look. And she thought that if she took a peek inside, nobody will ever know. And so she opened the lid. And once she peeked inside, in an instant, there was this buzzing, rustling, all kinds of moving sounds. And before she realized what happened, there flew out about tens of thousands of strange creatures. And they didn't look pleasant. They were all horribly bony and had death-like faces. And they looked ugly and horrifying. And they fluttered about everywhere. They flew to all different corners of the earth, and they settled down in corners and nooks when no one could see them. There were diseases, there were, troubles and sickness and misery and worries of all kinds. And they settled in humans' minds. And so, without even knowing what ailed them and without ever seeing them, people started to feel pain and sadness and death and misery. And the moment Pandora realized that this was the wrong thing to do, she shut the jar as soon as she could. But by then, all of these creatures had already escaped. And when she shut the lid, the one thing that was left at the bottom of the jar was hope. So that was the only thing that remained in the jar. And so misery and sadness spread all over the world. And back to Zeus, he didn't forget about punishing Prometheus himself. He went back after he had done his mischief, chained Prometheus to a rock where a vulture would come and eat his liver every day. And every day his liver would grow back, and every day the vulture would come back. And so that's how Prometheus was doomed to suffer. So that's the story of Pandora. Artie, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I love that story. So I'll start where I usually start, with a question, which is, where do you enter into that story?
So for me, when I read the story, specifically, to choose this for sacred space, and I started to look at symbol more than allegory, right? What struck me at the time was that Pandora's box, as we know today, originally was a jar. And that's really telling, because, a jar is a container, like a clay container, it's such a traditional symbol of femininity itself. Right? So it kind of
like a
holds
womb.
everything, like a womb,
Yeah.
right? Like it holds everything in the world. So, it kind of, and then Pandora herself, and it's her jar. So Pandora is a woman, is the feminine. And it just struck me that there is this symbolism of femininity here as the central theme of the story. And typically, like most of these stories in present day world, they've come to be associated with, you know, trouble and, you know, beware, don't you let sort of curiosity take over. Don't you let your feminine intuition take over. Don't you let, you know, impulse take over. All of these are bad things.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, regardless of your gender, right? I mean, we all have feminine and masculine within us.
Right, right. And don't you let emotions take over, and so on and so forth, right? So there's so much about, the stories made so much about a moral lesson, not so much moral, but, you know, like a wisdom lesson about restraint and to hold back and control. Whereas the central theme is a femininity. So that kind of struck me as really odd, but also very familiar, because that motif, I think, runs through a lot of fairy tales, as we've seen in the past. So that's what struck me.
I love that. I love that. So I would like to pick up on that. I would like to say, you know, this idea of allegory versus symbol that we've talked about in past sessions, where the allegorical lens is more of a fear, threat, or control, right? Aha, you let your curiosity get the better of you. You let the woman, the feminine, right, into the universe. And now you will be punished for that. As opposed to the symbol, or as we say here, the mythopoetic lens, right, which doesn't see it as, in terms of fear, threat, and control, violation and punishment, but rather to look at it as a kind of an overall pattern of a state of affairs that is so. Right? You can think of, for instance, you can think of the pain of childbirth, right, as a punishment, as a whatever, or you can think of it as like, this is just the way it is, right? It's not punishment, it's not blessing, it's actually a mix of both. And it is what it is. And when you look at the overall pattern, what you're looking for is not the source of threat that must be avoided, but the overall pattern and insight that may come to you. That is, you know, intrinsically nonlinear, right? The insight can come at you from any direction. And so as we seek to bring a more sort of mythopoetic, symbolic approach to reading a story like this, I should probably just pause and just give a little bit of a thumbnail on what we mean by mythopoetic, right? So when we read dreams, myths, fairy tales, even things that may happen in the outside world, in regular, real, everyday life, right? When we read something mythopoetically, what we mean by that is to basically read it where you regard every major actor in the story as being a symbol of a different part of your own inner self. Okay, so in this story, Prometheus is a symbol of a part of you. His brother is a symbol of a part of you. The clay figurines, which become animals and humans, are a symbol of a part of you. Zeus himself is a symbol of a part of you. Hephaestus, of course, and then, of course, Pandora, the all-gifted, right, feminine within you, is a symbol of a part of you. And so, the way you read any dream or myth or fairy tale is you start at the beginning with the cast of characters, and you try to look at it with a lens of regarding everyone, right? The jar itself, right, is a symbol of a part of you as well, as being different parts of your own inner self. And then you hit the play button, right, on the video, on the story, and you watch it unspool and unfold. And you look for different kinds of things when you start to read a lot of these things. You look for who's doing what to whom. What are the masculine elements doing? What are the feminine elements doing? These are all within you, right, regardless of your external gender. And then with regard to a story like this, what's very interesting to me is another way to read the story, which is to look at the beginning position, right? How is the world, how is the universe at the beginning? And compare it to the state of affairs of the world at the end of the story, and see what the difference is, and figure out, is it an improvement? Is it a sort of, have you increased the flaws of the world and the misery of the world? What has actually changed from the beginning to the end? And what caused that change? And how do we feel about that? Okay. So we see this sort of symbol of the process of this particular kind of transformation. And then we can sit without the sort of allegorical and the moral of the story is. We push all that aside for the moment. And we just say, given the before and after and how we got from point A to point B, how do we feel about that? What does it make us think? What does it make us realize about our own inner selves and about the arc of our own life? Right. And so with this story, I think one of the very interesting things is that after all the sort of sound and fury of everything that's happened, Zeus and Prometheus and the fire theft, and Pandora, the all gifted, right? Then bringing with her this womb that then births the all cursed, right? She is all gifted, and then she brings with her the all cursed. So there's this feeling of balance there, which is very curious and very interesting. Why is that? But one of the key things that hit me over the head, that jumped out at me when Gowrie read the story the first time, was that the signature thing at the end was that even after the 10,000 things came out and sort of made life more wretched on the earth, apparently, the thing at the final coda was this note that hope was at the bottom of the jar. So hope came out as well at the end of everything. Okay. So you look at that and you're like, okay, so at the end of the story, hope is there. But then you're like, well, wait a minute. Was hope not in the universe before? Right? Allegorically, we may say, well, this is just a creation story, or an origin story of how we came to have hope and everything. So I'm like, okay, the sort of schoolmaster can like beat it into me that that's what the story is about, because that's what the textbook says. But when you really look at the story, you're like, okay, so hope comes out at the end. But is that a change from the initial state of the world? In other words, is this implying that hope did not exist at the beginning of the story? Right? And the answer obviously is no, hope existed. I mean, the very existence of Prometheus, who is thinking ahead, right, about how to improve things. Hope is the driver of that. The very creation of a goddess figure like Pandora, right, the all-gifted, filled with beauty and gifts and everything, gifts of all the gods. It's like you can't even think of that without sparking hope within you, jar or no jar. So it's interesting. So it's like, so hope is at the end of the story, but hope is obviously at the beginning of the story. And it's like, oh, okay, starvation, envy, jealousy, death, misery is at the end of the story. But if you think about the beginning of the story, or at least in the beginning when Prometheus created the clay figurines that became us as humans, we didn't even have fire. We were living in caves. We were starving. We were wretched. That's the way Zeus liked it, apparently. So all of these bad things that apparently got released by the jar were already existent, right, at the beginning of the story as well. People starved. They felt cold. They didn't have fire. They lived miserably like the beasts, as the story says. So then when you look at a story like this, you look for the change in condition of the end of the story versus the beginning of the story. So the things that come out of the jar, that isn't really any kind of change. All of those things, you could argue, existed at the beginning of the story. And you could say that everything here is about the clay figurines, the beasts of the air and the land and the sea and humans. And everything is made, very tellingly, out of clay. right? So you could, this harkens back to the talk we did about a year plus ago on the Tao Te Ching, about the nature of reality, right? And what is the nature of true reality, which is something you kind of have insights about when you have experiences, like enlightenment and other things like that. You kind of perceive directly the nature of reality. So this fact that everything is clay harkens back to the Tao Te Ching talk. And so one of the things this story gives is this sense of, number one, differentiation. Before, everything was just clay. After, everything is still just clay, right? The amount of clay has not actually increased or decreased by the end of the story. But the thing that has changed is differentiation of the clay. Before it was just clay, and now we have beasts, now we have humans, now we have, all these different things. So there's differentiation and the intervention and compensating action of balance. Right? So Zeus in the Greek pantheon, his function is to keep everything balanced. We think of him as the patriarchal father and sort of all-powerful and everything. From our Judeo-Christian standpoint, he's sort of like a Yahweh, but not really, because strictly speaking, in the Judeo-Christian system, it's a monotheistic system, so there's only one God, right? So all the other aspects of your personality get like rubbed out or suppressed. But in a fully sort of populated pantheon, right, there's all these different gods, these different aspects of you that are fully in balance and perhaps in conflict, but there's diversity there. And so the function of Zeus is not just all-powerful declaring things, but for a reason, right? And the classical reason for basically everything Zeus does is to maintain balance, right? Sometimes we don't like how the balance is enforced. So we call it punishment. We characterize Zeus as this sort of random, churlish, punishing, petty force, right? But that's just our reaction, biased reaction as the clay figurines, and we're fully entitled to that, right? But Zeus generally gets a bad rap, right? With the lens of allegory and punishment and fear, threat, of control, you look at Zeus and you're like, oh my gosh, what does the old man want now? What have I done now? How am I in trouble now? But through the lens of archetype, through the lens of mythopoetic symbol, when you watch the details of how Zeus acts and functions, he is basically this like element that comes right on the heels of differentiation to keep things balanced, right? His function is to balance everything. And so as you differentiate, balance must come in to make sure everything is still flowing. And so you can ask, what is the before and after scene here, right? And I can argue hope already existed, but there's more differentiation and there's balance that comes in to compensate, right? That's the overall arc that we see here. So what is the thing that needs to be balanced? Okay, why does Zeus need to rush in and balance things? So allegorically, even in modern times, you can say this is an allegory about technology, right? The daemon of forethought, innovation, as we say here on the West Coast, design thinking, right? Creative thinking among humans, inspiring humans to innovate and try and make life better. Okay, and how you need to be careful when you're playing with fire, when you're playing with crypto or AI or climate change technology, right? You better be careful because all these unintended consequences will happen. So at an allegorical level, that's perfectly fine. You can take these lessons and fear punishment and try your best to avoid punishment. I'm not knocking that. But there is an alternate lens, which is the mythopoetic lens. Okay. And when we look at it from the point of view of the mythopoetic lens, we're like, there's not really a lot of change before and after. Right? Prometheus at the beginning already has hope, sadness, misery. He lost the Titan War, right? The Titanomachy. Right? These 10,000 things that apparently the jar unleashed already exist. So the key change then that is there in the end that was not there before is not fear, hope, misery. It's actually fire. The key thing that changes from beginning to end is the introduction of fire, which was very specifically not there at the beginning and is very, very palpably there at the end of the story. How do you read fire mythopoetically? So for me, the significance of fire in a dream and a myth is that fire is an archetypal symbol of the power of transformation. That is what is different about the world. The power of transformation has been introduced. Prometheus had the power of transformation and forethought. He created these beings in his own image, us humans. But as humans, we did not have the power of transformation before we had this gift of the fire theft. Okay. Now, through the pandemic, the last sort of year and a half plus of the pandemic, we have been talking about how we view and regard the pandemic, not through the lens of allegory and punishment, but through the lens of mythopoetics, only if you want, right? Only if you feel it's useful. And the pandemic as an agent of transformation. What is the role of fire in all this? The way transformation happens, and the image we always use is this cycle of caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly, right? The caterpillar is there perfectly happy being a caterpillar. He's eating everything inside because he just feels this natural hunger. And he or she does not realize that because of all the eating, when she gets to a certain size, she will then transform into this cocoon chrysalis, which basically means the caterpillar dies. Right? Of course, it resurrects as the butterfly, and all the sort of new age spiritual people will say, well, it's positive. It's all rainbow, rainbows and unicorns. It turned out well after all. And that is true. The butterfly is lovely. But we don't want to overlook the fact that the caterpillar still died, right? We did enjoy our caterpillar phase of life. And it's worthy of grief, right? Because it's so wonderful. You only grieve things that are good. So grief is a form of praise. And so this cycle, right, not of punishment. The caterpillar is not punished when they go into the cocoon. And it's not a reward when you come out the butterfly. But the key agent of this, right, is what happens in the cocoon. And what happens in the cocoon is literally transformation, right? The caterpillar's body melts and turns into goo and then reforms into a butterfly, right? A butterfly is not just a caterpillar with wings stuck on, right? The body, everything is completely different. It's a complete transformation. And in order to have transformation, you need two elements, as we've said from the beginning. Containment, right? The cocoon needs to remain sealed, and pressure, right? So when the changes happen, the containment creates the pressure, creating this liminal space, right? Or when you're cooking a meal, when you're making a stew in your Instant Pot, right? Pressure cooker. You need two things to make stew. You need containment. So the lid needs to be on and locked, and you can't peek, right? You need to keep it contained. And the second thing you need is heat. You need fire, right? To get things going, okay? And the containment needs to be maintained to keep the water of insight that turns into the spirit of steam, right? Because of the pressure, but to keep the steam in so that it continues to react with the vegetables and meats, whatever else is in there, so that the result is completely different. When you start a stew, it's like meats and raw vegetables, everything's crunchy and not very aromatic. After you make the stew, what comes out is completely different, right? The beginning didn't make your mouth water. When it comes out of the pot, hopefully if you've done it right, your mouth is, everyone starts showing up in the kitchen because they can smell the fragrance and they know dinner's ready, right? So if you didn't understand this process, you would have no idea that the end stew was related to all these raw vegetables that came out of the ground. If you didn't know the process of caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly, you would have no idea that this beautiful, colorful butterfly came from this like little wiggling worm, right? And what is the thing that transforms one to the other, right? It is this pressure that you feel within containment. In other words, the agent of transformation is fire. Fire is the key difference before and after. We see this all the time in our regular world and in our regular sort of just figures of speech and metaphors of our language. When we see someone ambitious, we say, oh, that person has a real fire in the belly, right? Why is it fire in the belly? The belly is the seat of the third chakra, Manipura. It is the chakra of ambition, will to power. And the element of Manipura chakra is fire. It's there for a reason. All of these images and archetypes are typically quite mythopoetically consistent. So there's actually, Gary, if you can find it, that talk on the 7 chakras that we did that describes all of this in detail. If you want to sort of go down that rabbit hole and do a nerd fest on that, we'll share that link as well. And so anyway, fire is this agent of power. And in this case, directed into the process of transformation. Prometheus makes these clay figurines with no advantages, no claws, fangs, no fur, no speed, no ability to leap onto the hills, specifically so that he can give us what the gods have. The animals are not like the gods. We are. Why is that? Because we have the spark of fire. With the spark of forethought, we have the ability to transform. Right? This is what distinguishes us from the animals and the beasts. Right? These beast-like figures of humans can come out of the caves and start to do all these things, to make tools, to hunt, to cook. Right? And interestingly, eventually, the gods and Zeus himself feed off of our transformation. When we burn incense in the temple, this is the ambrosial nectar of the gods. When we stop worshiping the gods, they go into hibernation, right? But the problem is that transformation doesn't stop. It keeps going, right? So in the human story, we eventually have now, in our modern world, seemingly evolved past the point of worshiping gods, right? So we have become like gods ourselves, sort of controlling the elements and quote unquote conquering nature, or trying to, right? And so the question of this transformation before and after. So we've introduced fire before and after. And the question is, are we better off with the jar open and Pandora within our midst among us, right? Are we better off now that we've had the use of this fire for so long? We have freedom to a certain extent. But we are also, in many respects, lost. Right? When we lose the gods, we lose this, in large part, this mythopoetic lens on the world. So we see everything as linear, not circular. We see everything as cause and effect, not archetypal. And so, in other words, we have freedom without the benefit of direction. We have lost our way in some ways. And I don't mean that allegorically, oh, you dumb slob, you've lost our way. We're all, sort of dunderheads, we've lost our way. I mean that we've lost our way, and maybe that's okay, right? Maybe that's a natural part of our transformation as humanity. But the question we get to ask is this freedom without the benefit of direction good? Are we okay with this state of affairs, or are we worse off? Right? All of my work as a healer, for instance, is to help free you from your wounds by teaching you, giving you techniques to sort of self-heal on your own sovereign power without any sort of, over-reliance on me or anyone else, right? For you to do this on your own sovereign power. So you feel your own sovereign power so that you have it for your own use continuously, even after you've healed, and to go on to your bliss, right? So you have all these tools to sort of attain and recover your own sovereign power and freedom. And the classical question, as like Joseph Campbell will always ask, well, now you're free. What are you going to do with all that freedom? Right? Are you just going to soothe and sort of do all these things to satisfy your animal body? Or are you just going to go off in this sort of intellectual thing and ignore your body and get lost with, sort of thinking about how to be immortal without even being in touch with your body in the first place? My answer to that, as most of you know, what you do with all that freedom is to find and follow your bliss, which is already within you, which to me is the ultimate spark, right? It's sort of the fire beyond fire. So humans receive the spark of fire, which allows them to undergo transformation and trigger their own transformations. And this is the thing that distinguishes us from the animals, one of the things. It's humans with their spark of fire, ambition, forethought, driven by fear and greed, right? That leads to everything: electricity, technology, the internet, all the things we have for the better or the worse. Okay. Now, so getting back to Pandora then, to me, what the Pandora story brings forward is this idea of when we get this spark of forethought, and there is this further differentiation. It's not just where the humans versus the animals, but the clay figurines in the shape of humans get the additional spark of fire, right? Whales can't use fire. Chimpanzees can't use fire, right? Ants can't use fire. We're the only ones that use fire in this way. And I don't mean just physically, I mean mythopoetically, right? We trigger our own transformation, for better or worse. Okay. And so with differentiation comes the imperative of balance, right? So the necessary counterweight at this level of transformation. So in the story, Zeus specifically is described as hurrying, right, to do this whole Pandora jar balancing thing, right? Prometheus, right, flouts his disobedience in the face of Zeus and gives fire to humans, right? You would think if he were just petty and jealous, his first order of business would not be to punish the humans. The humans did that. The humans had no choice, right? The humans are just pawns on the chessboard. His first order of business would have been to punish Prometheus, would it not? Right? As a human, you or me, my first thing would be to punish Prometheus, and then humans will figure out along the way. But he doesn't. Zeus, all powerful, lightning bolts and everything, right? He doesn't have to hurry. He doesn't have to lift a little finger. He hurries and rushes, right, to sort of do this thing with the humans before he even thinks about punishing the hubris, the violation of Prometheus, right? And so the question is, why is that, right? And if you see Zeus as like human and sort of acting petty and jealous, it makes no sense. But if rather you look at Zeus through the mythopoetic lens and you say, he is a symbol of my own inner sort of executive function of keeping everything balanced in my own inner kingdom, right? He hurries as a matter of just because this is the nature of the physics of the thing. Like when you hit a flint on a rock, right? The spark comes out in a hurry, immediately. Not because it's scared, not because of whatever punishment or whatever. That's just the physics of the thing. When you hit it right, the spark comes out immediately. And in exactly the same way, the minute fire is given, Zeus hurries to counterbalance. And so the message, the pattern for me, not the punishment, not the allegorical, you idiot, curiosity killed the cat or whatever, but the pure symbol that this reveals of the physics of the thing is that the stuff that comes out of the cooking pot, when you have the fire and you light it, and you start doing all these transformations, is both out of your control and balanced. Whether you like it or not, that's just the nature. It just is what it is. As opposed to what we would prefer, right? We would prefer to have all our transformations come out great, right? I would love to work out and come out all ripped, right? And buff, without any injuries or soreness, without any sort of backsliding into sort of lumpiness. But I can't, right? So transformations are never all good. There is always this intrinsic kind of law of physics tension between the power of transformation and fear, threat, and control. Said another way, you go into the cooking pot, the caterpillar goes into the chrysalis. There is no guarantee what will happen. We can tell you what's happened in the past, but there's no guarantee with you. Right? You go into the chrysalis and you're like, hooray, everyone. You know, on Instagram, I'm going in for my big transformation. A bird can come and like eat the cocoon and you're done. There's no guarantee. In surgical procedures, right? The physician will say, well, you know, it's 99%, it's very low risk. And you say, so everything will be fine, right? And he's like, well, you know, you never actually know. It is a surgery, right? There is risk. Okay. And so the headline here is this theft of fire, this capability of forethought, this capability we have as humans to trigger and accept and go into our transformations, knowingly or not. Sometimes we trigger transformation out of pure ignorance and foolishness. There is no transformation without risk and loss. Even the successful flight of the butterfly, you have lost the caterpillar. You have lost the cocoon. I mean, some of us would like to stay in the cocoon forever. There is no transformation without risk and loss. It's not a punishment. You haven't done anything wrong. It's just a state of affairs that is so. So when we have this magical capability, godlike capability to transform, it needs to be met like the spark from the flint with a counterbalancing force. When Zeus commands Hephaestus to craft Pandora, right? So the inner feminine, for those of you who are not familiar with my healing stuff, inner feminine, inner masculine, those are both things within us, regardless of our gender. We just call it inner masculine, inner feminine, because in dreams and fairy tales and myth, the inner masculine shows up as a god, the inner feminine shows up as a goddess, right? But the key functions of the inner feminine, since we're talking about Pandora here, are nourishment and nurturing and vision. The inner feminine is the seat of vision. Okay. So when Zeus brings Pandora, it is not punishment, but a reflection and balancing of Prometheus's act of the gift of fire. Right? So with the power of transformation comes Pandora and her jar. Said another way, with the power of transformation comes Pandora, all giftedness, and the jar, all cursedness. There is no transformation without risk and loss. There is no forethought, right? Prometheus, without curiosity, right? Can you make a Pandora without curiosity? Obviously not. It's not a flaw. It's not, oh, those curious women. It's like, you know, all the sort of scientific sort of advances and breakthroughs we attribute to men, and we shame the woman Pandora for curiosity, right? That's absurd, right? I mean, that's life in a patriarchy, right? So of course, all the breakthroughs were funded and spurred on by curiosity as well, right? Why would I think of the future, Prometheus, right, if I were not curious? Why would I think of making things better without also thinking, what if? Right? This is where the jar comes in. You put things into the cooking pot, vegetables, meat, spices, soup, and you don't know what will come out in the end. Right? Pandora is all gifted, and one of her gifts has to be curiosity, which means the jar has to open. The counterweighting of the 10,000 things of envy, fear, anger, depression, and then hope. It is touching to me that hope stays in the jar at the end, right? All the dark things fly out to counterbalance. By the way, those of you who have done, 7-day healing with me, right? What is in the jar? What are the 10,000 dark things, horrible things, disease, sort of all these things in the jar? It is a jar filled with lost board member. all the things we would love to excise out of our lives. Pretend we don't know them when we cross past them on the street. Say, no, 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 that's not me. I'm just this shiny rainbows and unicorn version. Right? Don't ask me about those other dark things. That's not the real me. They come back anyway, and they take their place in the inner realm of your life, whether you want to or not, eventually. Here, allegorically, we call that tragedy. For me, when we do healing, the meaning of the word healing is to make whole. When those lost board members come back to us and we have the presence of mind to see them for what they are, kind of scary, kind of like not as pretty and perfect, but still a part of us. And we recover them and we integrate with them and come to reconciliation with them, then we are healed because we have become whole again. Right? They don't belong stuffed in a jar. Hope stays in the jar. Why does hope stay in the jar? One way of reading that is that hope stays in the jar because hope is already balanced. Hope is already in the world. Right? Prometheus created everything with hope. He went up, stole fire, took on his punishment with the eagle eating his liver every day with hope. Forethought has hope and curiosity. Right, so when Prometheus, with hope and curiosity, gave humans fire, Zeus hurried to balance it by giving humans the other things Prometheus had that he tried to cut off and just give us the fire. So transformation, leading to forethought, hope, and all giftedness and all cursedness. So Zeus is just keeping the balance. He's not punishing us from this lens and point of view. And so the headline, if you will, is maybe to say something like, transformation may be good or bad. You cannot actually control it. Also, like the caterpillar going into the cocoon, you ultimately cannot choose whether you go into transformation or not. Right? And we're like, oh, that's such a... Well, look at the beginning, even before the fire. Humans didn't even have a vote whether they would be created by Prometheus or not. Right? You're like, well, we didn't choose if we wanted fire or not. It's like, it's not just that goes further back than that, my friend. You didn't even choose whether to be created or not. And yet, here we are. Right? You are given then the spark of transformation. And then all these things are unleashed at once. Some good, some bad, and you have no choice. So what is the overall symbol here? That it's an allegory, you've been bad and you've been punished. No, it's more symbol. The archetype, the overall pattern is that you are of clay. Everything is of clay. And you didn't have a choice. You have all the gifts and all the curses. You are all gifted, Pandora, and you have all the 10,000 burdens. But above all else, right, part and parcel with all of this, you have the spark of fire. You have the capability of transformation. You don't really control it, but you are definitely better off with it. You are like a god with it, right, for better or worse. Like that story we told a few months ago with Loki, right, and Odin, and the golden apple, where we said the golden apple was the symbol of the nurturing insight of wisdom, right? Here, the spark of fire is this golden apple, right? We have been given this golden apple like the gods. So Eve in the Garden of Eden, plucking the apple and feeding it to herself, and Adam is the same thing, right? The illumination of insight cooks, nourishes, warms, right? The golden apple gives you eternal youth. And Zeus says, if you give them fire, right? If you give them fire, if you give them this golden apple, right? He's like, they will become wise. which is so fascinating that Zeus says this. He doesn't say they will become strong and overthrow us. He doesn't say, well, they will become pampered and lazy, and then who will, like, give us offerings of incense, right? He could say any one of those. But the big thing he does actually say, right? He says, if you give them fire, they will become wise. They will, specifically, he said, they will become wise like the gods. Like the gods. Okay, and if you do that to them, the counterbalancing will have to happen. Right? So with this symbol, what do we do with the symbol like this? Or what more can we do with the symbol like this? You could say, well, I guess I'm a human. I'm this clay figurine. I didn't choose to be here. I didn't choose to get this. You could be the caterpillar, right? The grumpy caterpillar, who's like, I didn't choose transfer. I have no interest in being a butterfly. I like chewing on leaves. Once I'm a butterfly with the straw for a nose, I have to drink sweet nectar. Everyone on Instagram saying it's like great, that sweet nectar, but it's like, I like my, pastrami and cheese and leaf sandwich from the deli around the corner, and I like chewing my food. I don't want to drink my food, right? So I didn't choose to be here. Let me just play small, not trigger any transformation. All I want is a comfortable life. I'm just a regular person. And I would just like to stay as is, straight and narrow, normal life, white picket fence, if you please. Okay, so that would be one reaction, and that's totally okay, right? So in other words, you could say, I try to get as much benefit from this fire thing and this whole figurine thing with as little risk of transformation as possible. In fact, thank you, Artie, for telling me about this archetype of the caterpillar. Because now I know that I can eat leaves, but I just have to make sure I control myself and don't eat too many leaves. Right? Because if I eat too many leaves, then I'm going to tip over in a transformation and my whole life could blow up. And I actually don't want that to happen. Right? So literally, when I teach the Bliss program on how to find and follow your bliss, I give a specific threshold of this 20% threshold. We define it in terms of hours in the day or whatever, right? And we basically say, because people start to get nervous when they find their bliss, when they understand what their bliss is, they're like, well, if I do this, I'm liable to like get addicted to my bliss and I don't just run off and join the circus. And that would be awful, I think. And they think about it more. And it actually wouldn't be awful. It would be amazing, but it would cost me a lot. It would be a very painful transformation to go through, right? And literally, when we teach the Bliss program, I mean, we're not trying to make any trouble here. But if you're interested in Bliss, we teach the Bliss program. And then I'll say, you can do Bliss as long as you stay under 20%. If you tip over 20%, you've eaten too many leaves, you will start to go through this deeper transformation. And if you want to avoid that, just stay way under, stay at like 7 or 8%. Most people, right, their bliss level unwittingly is just 1%. Right? So even if you're like at 5% bliss, you're perfectly safe, far away from the 20% threshold. But even at 5%, your quality of life is 5x better than it was before at 1%. So that's already a huge win. Take all your chips off the table, cash them out, go home, enjoy your life. 5% bliss, 10% bliss, 20% is the red line. You cross that, the Instant Pot, the stew is going to get made, and we don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows. Okay, so that's approach number one. Or even more hardcore, no bliss. Right? Just continue on your career track and just get on with it. So that's door number one. Door number two is the other extreme, to say, well, wait a minute. So we're all just clay anyway. Humans are clay, animals are clay. Pandora is clay. The jar is clay. All of these things are illusory. There's only one thing that actually exists, the Tao Te Ching talk, and that's clay. And when you say things are illusory, that's kind of a shamey way of describing the phenomenal world. I mean, it's true everything is clay, you know, but I like the form of Pandora. I like the form of, you know, pigs and cattle and beautiful sunsets, and delicious meals, right? So the reality is that these forms are real. These images, even though they're illusory images, the images are real enough, and we take our enjoyment, right? But there's a school of thought, door number 2, which says, actually, you know, all these things are just illusory. There's only one thing. So let's do this. Let's go into the caves, cut ourselves off from the rest of this illusory society and humanity, leave the village, go into the forest, and meditate, and come to enlightenment and realize our intrinsic clayness, directly perceive the clayness of everything, right? And therefore, by so doing, we will transcend and escape the dualistic extremes of giftedness and cursedness. This is the approach of transcendent enlightenment in all of its different traditions across human culture. Right? This goes back to the Tao Te Ching talk again. There's only one thing that actually exists. Is there a way to realize our way back to the clayness, right? So that we can encounter and experience fire and not be transformed, right? I can walk on a bed of hot coals. I can lie on a bed of nails and not be worried, okay? And this is the second approach. Now, I'm not knocking that either. That's a perfectly valid approach. Just being a corporate, you know, family person, white picket fence is a perfectly valid approach either. It's like door number 1 and door number 2, the two extremes of the spectrum. And both are perfectly valid. You can choose based on, you know, it's like chocolate cake or vanilla cake. You just pick. Right? There's nothing wrong with either of them. I'm just describing them. Okay. So then we have these two approaches. Leave the clay as it is, stay as far away from full transformation as possible, and just get on with it. Don't rock the boat. You know, stay in your house, stay in the cave, the figurine clay cave, and play small. Door number 1 versus door number 2. You see the reality of clay, and then you transcend the clay in order to escape via enlightenment this curse, this, you know, sort of allegorical curse punishment of this duality of blessedness and cursedness together, right? So I want non-duality, which is still duality, because non-duality is dual. But you know, it's fun to try, right? It's fun to try and try to escape, right, all of this through enlightenment. So door number 1, normal life. Door number 2, escape everything. And one question is, which would you pick, right? What would you choose if you had the choice? And actually, all of you, myself included, we do have that choice. Or, right, is there a third path? Okay. And if so, what is this third path? So for me, the third path is the approach of finding and following your bliss. Right? Other ways to say it would be, there was this talk we did a while ago on the 4 yogas. I don't know if, Garo, you can find that link and share it. But the 4 yogas, bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, would be devotion to your job, devotion to your family, the white picket fence, your dogs and cats, your community, all of that, perfectly fine. There's Raja Yoga, right? Which is the yoga basically of the monastic path, right? Trying to realize your clayness and escape this, you know, sort of punishing world of slings and arrows, and have your escape. You know, which is still biased. You're still like Prometheus, trying to get all of the good and none of the bad, right? And then the third approach, which is the bliss approach, would fall under the category of karma yoga. Karma yoga. And we describe all that in that other 2-hour talk, and I won't sort of replay it all here. So this third approach The third approach would be to have this nourishing insight of this golden apple of nourishing insight, right? Of, oh, we're clay. Oh, and we have fire. Okay? So we have clay and we have fire. That's very interesting. Okay, and so there's a certain kind of personality that says, if I'm clay and there's fire, well, why don't I like go and jump into the oven, the firing kiln, and see what happens? I mean, what do you do with clay after you've shaped this figurine? You fire it to get the glaze on and to see what happens. Can I actually use this mug to drink my coffee, or will it disintegrate? Right? So instead of saying, stick to what I've been given and just play small and try not to rock the boat, or escape this entire punishing sort of state of affairs. I can't do it anymore. You know, Calgon, take me away, right? You say clay is fine, fire is fine, and you reach this next level of openness and wonder and curiosity, where you're like, well, you know, we're here after all anyway. Yeah, we didn't have a choice, and woe is me. Prometheus created me, and then he gave me this fire. Now Zeus is upset, and you know, I didn't do anything. I was just sitting there as a lump of clay, minding my own business, and now here we are in the middle of all this drama, right? Well, try not to like catch any more hellfire and anger from Zeus, or let me get out of this entire thing. Or you can say, well, we're here anyway, right? What do you want to do? And it's like, oh, I never wanted to come on this vacation. Why did I? Well, we're already here. Let's like look around and see what there is to do here. Right. So yeah, we're all clay ultimately, but now we're in these forms. So this curiosity is like, well, what form did you actually take, my fellow lump of clay? Right? How do you feel? You know, oh, you have wings? What do wings do? Whoa, I didn't know you could do that. I can't do that. Right? I have fins and gills. Let me see what I can do. This to me is the question of bliss. Right? Your bliss flows through you like a river. It pre-exists in you like a line of grain in wood. You were formed out of clay, out of a certain form. You didn't get to choose your form, not really, as far as you know. And yet, here we are. Right? And so the act of finding your bliss is to self-reflect and look at what form you actually take inside, right? And see what that pattern almost points to as a vector, right? I have wings, so maybe I can try to flap them. Or I can play small, not rock the boat, that's fine. Or I can try to escape my wingedness altogether and go back to my clayness. Totally cool. Door number 3, I have wings. Let's see what happens when I flap them. Right? And you don't get to choose whether you have wings or gills, right? I didn't choose my bliss as a healer. It's just how I grew. Right? My bliss is healing. Somebody else's bliss is computer science, furniture making, dance, crypto, cooking. They didn't get to choose that either. Different lumps of clay shaped into different forms. Right? So this other approach is to say, well, we're here anyway. We can go, we can, you know, sort of enlighten and escape if we wanted to. And there's always time for that later. In the meantime, what do we got here? Where are we? How have I been shaped? What do I like to do for no good reason? Karma yoga. Well, all right, if that's what I like to do, let's carry it forward and see what happens. Curiosity. Right? Which also comes with the risk of pitching ourselves into transformation. And no transformation comes without risk and loss. But if you really feel your clayness, it's like, well, you know, we can take a little risk. It's all right. Because we come into this world in these shapes and we are uncured, not yet tempered by fire. We have not gone into the kiln. And if we do come into the kiln, we may crack or come out with a layer glistening with as an entirely new thing. or we may melt into a lump again. And that's why people are terrified. And we are right to be terrified. Bliss is terrifying. But that is door number 3. Right? You can come up with a door number 4 if you wanted. But those are the 3 major doors, right? That is the question on bliss. We could carry on without transformation, not jump into the fire. Or we can meditate and escape our form and try to go back into the clayness, the field, right? Or we could leap forward and say, all right, let's see what happens when we do this. What does this button do? What does that lever do? Or we can find the clues of how we were shaped and then lean into that for no good reason. Now, I am biased, right? And my bias typically is more in the direction of the 3rd option, not always. But just because that's my bias doesn't mean it's the right answer. Any of the 3 options are just fine. You find instantiations of this, people living different versions of the 3 options all across humanity. And that's a-okay. It's just whatever you want. And honestly, the reason why it's whatever you want is because you are the sovereign of your life. Right? You didn't choose to be here. You didn't choose what your bliss is. You didn't choose to have this power of transformation. But now you do. Right? And not as a human, not a god, but not unlike the gods. You do have this sovereign say over what you do with the shape you are in now. For me, this is a story, this Pandora story then, is a story that symbolizes all the drama of the world and how it came to be at a mythopoetic level. Giftedness and cursedness. Right? Fire existed, right, before Prometheus stole it for us mythically. Right? I mean, this volcanoes on the earth created fire, gave you access to fire. Thunderbolts hitting dry trees like there was fire. Okay, so the fire we're here talking about is not the actual physical chemical fire. We're talking about the spark of transformation that comes into the experience of being human, right? And the balance that all of that implies, that you become all gifted and all cursed. You have these dual realities of giftedness and cursedness. And the key then, to me, of not the allegory, you better do this, but of the pattern, is that given the state of affairs, you can choose how you play the hand dealt to you. You can play small, that's perfectly reasonable, small and safe. You can try to escape, or you can lean into whatever shape you are in. Okay. All action, manifestation, implementation by Prometheus on the inner masculine side, right? Countered by the feminine Pandora, all gifted, all cursed, countered by her reflection, inward peeking into the jar and curious wonder. And the fulcrum here between the two, masculine and feminine, is hope, right? That's the one that stays in the jar. Hope is the midpoint between forethought and afterthought, Prometheus's brother. Right? Because if you have no memory of the past, you have no basis for what you expect in the future. And then the spark is hoping that it will be better. Okay, so those are some of the notes I had. And Gary, do you want to come back on screen? And I'd love to hear what else you have to add.
Hi, Artie. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you and see you.
Great. I love how, you know, the story brings about the concept of balance. You know, once you mention it, it just becomes so obvious in everything. And I also love the idea that when you said forethought already has curiosity combined with it. And then you go back to the story and see that Pandora marries Epimetheus and not Prometheus, right?
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, so Pandora is the epitome of curiosity, and she goes and marries Epimetheus, which is afterthought. And then there's a balance because Prometheus already has curiosity, so you kind of balance it out by wedding her to Epimetheus. So it's just lovely how that story just covers the theme of balance all through, and it's kind of liberating. You know, when you first said that when you go through transformation, there is a risk, and anything could happen, and it may not always be good, and that's worrying in a way. But also, when you realize that whatever path that transformation takes, there's a balance of good and bad. There's a gift in it, and there's a curse in it, and you go through pain and misery and suffering and loss, but also you come out with certain gifts. And it's not to say that, don't worry, there will be gifts, and therefore, don't mind the curses, put them in a jar and forget about them. It's not to say that. Look at the bright side, and you've got this and this. But it's also not to say that, worry and anxiety and everything is the only thing, because you don't know what's going to happen. And you don't know what's going to happen it's kind of exciting. Because the balance of the gift and the curse together forms what you call in your Bliss program, the tsiran, which is, the line of your bliss. The lines within you, like how a tree has lines, that form the unique kind of shape and hologram of the tree. You have these lines within you, and these lines are the manifestation of what you've been through in your transformation, the gift and the curse, the good and the bad, the loss and the power, everything together. So in a sense, that when you realize that balance is what is liberating, because you know that whatever goes through in the kiln, when you come out, you've got the seed of your bliss anyway, right?
For better or worse.
Yeah, for better or worse, you've got the shape of that bliss, planted in you as a seed. So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to kind of, I have to kind of clench and create bliss out of this experience. I have to forge bliss in my life, and that's so much pressure to to kind of form bliss. You don't have to. It already comes out within you. So that's just, wow, that's a relief.
If you want, yeah.
Yeah, if you want. Yeah. So thank you for that. Good. That's an awesome revelation.
What else?
And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, again, comes back to me that there's something that you said in one of the previous talks. I can't remember which one, but the one where you talk about, curse and blessing. And at that point, you just to give a background to people who hadn't been part of that talk, is that you have blessings, and lack of blessings kind of manifests as curse, when cursed people kind of envy when they see people blessed with things, and then they try to grab it by force. And that's what leads to the kind of conflicts that we see in the world. And this thing, today, when we were talking about gifts and curses going together at the same time, in a way, it gives me this safety feeling within the sacred space that I always get, that, there are gifts and there are curses in the world at the same time. And when we act out our curses most of the time, what gifts are we missing? What gifts are we not seeing? And is it just a question of not seeing them? Or is it that in the interplay, the gifts kind of take a backseat for a while, and we're only you're sort of saddled with curses, and then the wheel of time turns around, and then the gifts come to the fore. But I'm kind of sensing an interplay there, and I hope that's the case, at least for us to see in this world, because we've been burdened with all the curses of present problems.
That's really interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. I think so. When we talked about that, it was in the context of racial strife in the United States, right? This feeling of blessedness and cursedness.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things to say about that is that there is first of all, when we talk about blessedness, we're not talking about your material abundance, your physical safety. Those can be more seen as gifts, giftedness, right?
Right.
Or just benefits or advantage or privilege or whatnot. So there's like giftedness and cursedness. And then almost above it is this sense of blessing. And so blessing is not, how much money is in your bank account or what degrees, how physically beautiful you are. Blessing to me is more of a state of the soul. Okay. Blessing is a state of the soul. And I think one of the ways we can think about it in the context of this conversation, at least, is that we all have this mix of giftedness and cursedness. To go even further, we could say we all have the state of all giftedness and all cursedness. Our acorns, as they become oak trees, have all of this within them. Okay. And the state of blessing, in a way, is to be able to be aware of this state of affairs. And for your inner, whatever combination it is, whatever is around you have, whatever bliss you have, however you are, is for that to be seen and blessed by you, right? By you, by yourself. So you don't hate yourself. You're not like insecure. You're like, this is just what I am. It's like, so I'm a healer, right? That's what I am. I'm not a hedge fund manager. I'm not a tech CEO, although I, did a great job impersonating one for many years. But, this is what I am. And it's taken a while for me to get to the point of not just realizing it, but coming to terms with it and accepting it. Right. And so it's this feeling of, so what happens when you bestow bless? So now I'm an older man now, right? So when I encounter, and I'll just use the sort of male sort of initiation kind of lens of this. When I encounter younger men, right? There are different ways that I explicitly and implicitly will bestow my blessing upon them, right? And to me, the act of blessing is a key part of initiation. There is no initiation without blessing. And the act of blessing, among other things, contains two elements where I see you, right? I see you, the deep you, the you that you perhaps will be hiding, right? And perhaps you'll be ashamed of. And without judging it good or bad, right? I see it. And then the second aspect is, strictly speaking, I hold space for it, like we are in sacred space. I hold space for this thing in you that I see. I don't technically declare it good, because then that gives me fear, thought, and control authority. Because if I declare good, I could declare bad tomorrow. Right? And that's a common, I guess we would call it narcissistic trick, where like, say you're good today, I say you're bad tomorrow. And And whether you actually good or bad, you're like reliant on me for your next thing. Right? So blessing is different from that, where I see it and I hold space for it. And when I just hold space for it without declaring it good or bad, okay, I am, in effect, keeping your sovereignty over whatever it is within you that I'm seeing on your side of the boundary line. Right? So I'm keeping sovereignty on your side, which is critical if I'm going to initiate you from boyhood to manhood. If you're just reliant on me, you're still a boy. So that is a critical element. So blessing is explicitly, I may say something if you're, the son of a friend and I like pull you aside, right, with your parents' sort of approval, right? Or just implicitly, I'm interacting from and energetically, I feel the essence of this person and I hold space for it. Now, typically the experience of the person on the other side is that I am blessed. He approves of me. And that may or may not be the case, right? But that feeling of being seen is so unlike anything you experience in the profane world that just seeing you without trying to control you, for better or worse, right, feels liberating, because just you see me and I retain my sovereignty. That's something I never felt as a boy. And now I'm feeling it. I feel like what it is to be a man or an adult, right? Sort of regardless of gender. And that is part of the act of initiation, guiding you to that thing where like I tip you into this water and you feel like, oh my gosh, right? There is this state of being that I have access to now that I did not have access to before. Another aspect of it, not to spend too much time on this, is this idea in initiation that comes with blessing is this idea of confirmation as opposed to approval, right? Approval being, well, I see the thing and I approve of it or I don't approve of it. That's just today. Tomorrow, you'll need to come back for another hit of my validation and approval. Maybe I'll give it, maybe I won't. That's why I'm the king and you're the subject. And I am sovereign over you, right? Full true initiation from, just in this case, boyhood to manhood is where I see it, I hold space for it, and I confirm it, right? So I confirm it as valid. I may not agree with it, but I confirm it as valid. And the difference between confirmation and approval is that confirmation cannot be revoked, right? It is a one-time act that makes you my equal as a fellow man, and I cannot revoke it. So when I did this with my own son, I had to explain to him explicitly, decades from now, right? If you decide I'm this evil villain, or you're the villain and I'm the hero, right? And I become criminally insane and I go over I do all these bad things, and you have to fight with me to the death to save the world, right? I mean, just whatever, just making an example. Even in that where we're pitted against each other as sworn enemies, I do not have the power to revoke my confirmation. It has been given, and it cannot be revoked. You are my equal as a man. I'm not giving you that power. I'm initiating you into your pre-existing power at this stage of your life. I see what is in you. I hold space for it. I protect you from the outside world during this period of initiation, and I confirm the validity. And that's it. That's my job as an older man. And then you're sovereign. You decide what you're going to do. Win, lose, or draw. Same deal I got. And I can comment on how you're playing your hand, and you can comment on mine. But as equals. Yeah, this question of do you state what you see? That's a little bit more of an. I mean, you can. It's more of a. So initiation doesn't necessarily involve bliss. So the purest form of initiation to me, energetically is to not even state that. It is to sort of hold space for them to discover what it is, and that may take years. But my bias, and states of initiation are different all throughout the world, right? But the core sort of essence for me, my bias, if you can swing it, right, is to be as hands-off as possible. You don't want to state anything at all. Especially with kids, sons and daughters, they're always looking to you, right? Not just what you say, but what you do as to like what you will approve of, because they want that. They want to know, like, I want to know what I need to do to like get the gold star, get the brass ring, right? And so as an adult, you have a lot of power as an authority over them in their early childhood. But over time, even before full initiation, they cross this line where you go from authority to advisor. Typically around 7 or 8, frankly, or earlier, right? Where it's like, I know what the rules are, and I'm going to rebel or whatever as I'm going to. So yeah, you're still my prison warden, you're my authority, and I can decide whether to, but there's an added role I need once I get to a certain, 7 or 8 years old, where it's like, I need an advisor too. But I pick who my advisor is. Because even though I'm 7, I am still the sovereign of my own life. I still get my own clay figurine, which is not your clay figurine, as much as you would like to think it's yours as my parent. Right? And I will decide who I take as my advisor. It could be someone on Instagram. It could be someone, it could be a friend, it could be an auntie or uncle, or it could be you, right? And if I've hired you as my advisor, and when we do the parenting program, we do all of this, you will know when you've been hired as the advisor, and you will know when you have been fired as their advisor. You won't get an email, but when you say, how was your day at school? Fine. What did you do? Nothing. What did you do at your friend's house? Nothing. We just hung out. And the phone is like this. What are you doing? Nothing. I'm checking homework. They barely even make eye contact. So when that happens, doors slamming, not talking to you, you have been fired as advisor. You still have authority as the prison warden. I can take away your phone. I can take away your allowance. I cannot feed you. I can like not give you dessert or whatever. But that's just authority. Right, advisor is a completely different category, and you've got to hustle. If you want to be your child's advisor, you got to hustle like any other client, service provider, consultant relationship. You don't get that by default. You get an audition by default, but most of us blow it right off the starting box because we're still in authority mode, and we don't realize that it's time for us to initiate as parents into advisors. And then the step beyond that is just to actually be their initiator, which actually is not even... In traditional cultures, when you took the child for initiation, all these sort of uncles and other men and aunties and other women of the village would go to manage the initiation process. And the only one that wouldn't go would be the mother herself and the father herself. Because there's too much tension and conflict and whatever, right? In the modern world, we don't have that. So we're all kind of just, kind of making it up as we go, which is good and bad because now you have full freedom to do it however makes sense. But in the classic Joseph Campbell question, now you've got all the freedom. What are you going to do with all that freedom? And for me, it's just powerful to look at these mythopoetic patterns and archetypes, not just from the past. I mean, the Pandora story is now, right? Yeah. It's eternal. It's outside of time. You can look at it at any point in the chronological arrow of historical Western time, and it will be relevant. And it's powerful to do that because the patterns that do not change with time are the ones that give, to me anyway, the best golden apples.
Yeah. So now, what reflections would you suggest or recommend for this month?
Okay, so let's do that. So thank you, Gary. So the exercise we thought of for this week, and And if you're not familiar, the way we do these exercises is, principle number 4 of proceeding in sacred space: no expectation of participation. Do this only if you want. No pressure. But if you would like, the way you would do this is to get some paper, notebook, pencil, and pen, or on your phone, and go someplace where you can be alone for 20 minutes so you can write in peace and quiet. If you can't do that in your home, drive out to the grocery store to run an errand. And when you park, before you go into the store, sit there for 10 or 15 minutes and do the exercise in your car. Lock the door. No one will miss you. It's only 10 or 15 minutes. Okay. After you write it out, look at it so it's on paper at least once. And then if it's too sensitive, just throw it out, burn it. Don't write your name on it. But you want this imprint and then reflection back to you to get you more clarity and refinement as to like how you think about whatever it is the issue will bring up in this exercise. Okay. So for this exercise, the question is, given everything we've talked about, what do you feel your fate is? The shape of your clay figurine, your bliss, right? What door would you like to pick? Door number 1, 2, or 3, if you have a sense for it. Right? Is your fate to just be a regular person, white picket fence, blah, blah. And if that's your fate, do you resist it? Do you fight it? Do you try to be better off than when you started, but within the regular person kind of template, right? So where you do your stuff, you raise your family, you do your job, but you also add on wellness and self-improvement, right? All while still making money and trying to gain status, but also getting to a higher vibration. All the things we try to do in the modern wellness industrial complex, right? So what do you feel your fate may be, and how do you react to it? That's the first question. Okay. And then what would it take then for you to embrace your fate? Right? Or even get to the point, as Nietzsche once described, as amor fati, to actually love your fate and embrace it. Right? And given how I read this story, let's just take this story as the pattern, the Pandora story and the Prometheus story. It's a fated thing that we are all clay. Okay? And there are 3 ways of engaging. A, being resigned to it, but without going into transformation. B, try to escape it by meditating your way back into the clay. Okay? And the third is to embrace it, where you say, what is then the flavor and essence of my shape in clay? And let me follow that all the way through, into the kiln, out of the firing oven, and beyond. Right? This is in many ways the question of bliss. Put another way, it's like a different way of asking the fate question. What do you feel like you may be shaped and predestined to do? And then you go and try and actually do that. And I'll just say, this is a tough exercise. We've been doing these sessions now for over 1.5 years now. I'm running out of the easy exercises. We're getting to the tougher exercises now. And now coming out of the pandemic, right? These are questions many of us are asking. Like, we're emerging from the cocoon, right? What do we feel we are here to do now? Right? Pre-pandemic, many of us were in zombie mode on autopilot, right? Now with this pressure and containment of being in the chrysalis cocoon of lockdown and the pandemic for over 1.5 years, we're coming out and we're looking at the world with different eyes. Our eyes themselves have changed, right? We no longer have caterpillar eyes. We have butterfly eyes. And many of us, I'd say all of us, given where we are, do not have the vocabulary to even express how different we are now versus before, let alone have a pattern for how we think about how to move forward. And so this exercise and these questions will hopefully help us to touch upon that. Okay. All right. So it's 11:55. And that's basically all I think we had for today. And I will go ahead and close our sacred space for this month. So our next session is next month. And I will just drop the link. Facebook, how do I drop? Okay. In Facebook and Crowdcast. It's free, open to the public. Please invite your friends, only if you want. So I would look forward to seeing you all there. And for now in this session, I'll go ahead and close the session by saying that I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great month, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you. Thank you.